Okay, we might as well get started. So, hi everyone. Thank you for coming today. Welcome to Rise to the Occasion, Strategies for Scaling Your Bakery Business. Certainly on the front end, want to thank Jenna Huntsberger, founder and CEO of Whisked by Jenna, for taking time out of what is the busiest time of the year, the holiday season. So thank you very much for that. I do have to say this is our most popular webinar to date. So we must have found something that's on the minds of a lot of businesses, which is the joys and challenges of scaling. And we'll get into that in a second. A couple housekeeping items quickly. The recording for this will get emailed out. And so if you have to leave for some reason, then we'll email this out afterwards. And the second thing is we do have the question forum open. So if you type in your questions at any time, we will try to get them handled during the webinar. And if not, we can email out the answers afterwards. So without further ado, let's take a quick look at the agenda here that we're going to go through. We're going to just introduce Jenna and her company quickly and Wherefour. And then we'll get into the meat of it, which is kind of going over the growing pains that she's experienced in scaling her business, the technology that she's used to overcome some of those things, and then lastly, getting SQF certified, which most of our small business customers are doing. So first of all, why don't I again introduce Jenna, CEO of Whisked by Jenna, and why don't you tell us a little bit about your company?
Yeah, sure. So my company, Whisked by Jenna, as you can see, we started at a farmer's market in 2011, really selling all manner of baked goods. And we started wholesaling to small specialty stores in the DC area, which is how we developed our main product lines, which are cookies and pies. Now we sell those products to around 300 stores in the mid-Atlantic area. We're pretty unique sort of in the CPG space because we both manufacture and distribute our baked goods. So we have a direct relationship with those 300 stores. And then we also work with Kava, the fast casual concept. That is a product that we distribute through distributors, and that puts us in their 300 locations nationwide.
And the rest of them, you're delivering in your own vehicles?
Yes, we are. Yes,
Okay.
it's quite the logistics.
A lot of logistics, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, thank you for that. So Wherefour really quickly is an ERP that helps small and medium-sized businesses manage their inventory and compliance. Our customers are in industries that care about compliance and supply chain traceability, mostly including personal care, cosmetics, and of course, food and beverage, which is by far our largest segment of customers. So let's hop in quickly here. We're going to open up a poll. One of the main things that we're here to talk about are the growing pains and challenges of scaling a small business, mainly a bakery. And so we're going to have a quick poll here and announce the results at the end. So that'll pop up now. We'll give everybody about 30 seconds to answer. Okay, let's dive into the content here. We're again going to try to deliver as much value as quickly as possible, try to get through this in about 12 to 15 minutes. So we're going to dive right into this. And without further ado, let's talk about the challenges that you faced going from a small bakery to one at scale, as like you said, serving hundreds of customers a day. So the first thing that we talked about when you were talking about this earlier. Let's see here. So the first thing that we talked about are scaling up the small batch recipes. So we want to talk a little bit about that and how you did that and how you overcome the challenges there.
So, this is a really painful process for a lot of people because something that works in a home kitchen or like a 20-quart small mixer is not going to work at scale and is not going to work in the types of equipment that will make it easier for you to manufacture your process. So like our recipes over the course of the years have changed a lot depending on where we were baking and what equipment that we were able to bring in. And as I say, the way to overcome this challenge is just by trial, error, and patience. So, we started out, really small operation. We made cookies and we scooped them by hand. And we were scooping about 5,000 cookies a week by hand. And that was very, very difficult on my staff, and everyone is having a lot of wrist pain. So we brought in a VMAG depositor that mechanically scoops our cookies. And what we found is all of a sudden our cookies are really tough. They didn't taste as good. Like it really compromised our quality. And so we had to go through just a process of trying different kinds of flour, of chilling the dough, of, mixing it differently until we could match the quality spec to the hand scoop cookie as well as we were able to with that equipment. And I found with manufacturing, it really is just being extremely patient and making a lot of little tiny changes to your recipes before you will get them to work, as you scale up with the equipment that you're able to bring in.
Did you do that all yourself, or did you consult some other folks that had done it before, or just kind of figured it out on your own?
It's a mix. So when we first got our VMAG riser, it's the company we bought it from, sends down a bakery specialist to kind of help you adapt your recipes. And that was a great start. But like there were still a lot of problems that we encountered with the product. Like, it's different when you're using a depositor on a day where it's 100 degrees out, which it gets to be in DC. It's very hot here in the summer, versus when it's 30 degrees and it's in the middle of the winter. And that kind of stuff, you have to troubleshoot it on the fly. I will say that I brought in a production manager who had a lot of experience with like big bakery equipment. He came from a much larger bakery that made bread. And so he is just an equipment whisperer. And like he and I together really worked on these recipes to make sure that they, again, were working with the equipment, but also meeting our quality specs. And every time we bring in a new piece of equipment, it's just the same process. It's being patient, doing test batches and doing it over and over again until you get it right.
How long does this usually take you? Is it like a rapid trial and error over a period of days, or is it you talking about weeks and months?
I mean, I think you can set something up over 2 weeks to a month where it will work, but you're going to be fine tuning that process like for 6 months to a year. And I would say, the continuous improvement of your operation and your product quality is never finished. Like you should always be striving to make a better and better product. And so that's really what we try to, I guess, incorporate into our company values, is this good? Is there a way that we can make this better, through our processes?
Good advice for any business. So let's move on here. So the second thing that you had mentioned when we were talking earlier was really the financial management and making decisions to invest in equipment, maybe potentially automation that you've already talked about, weight against labor costs. So why don't you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, this is really tricky because, we're always looking at, can we bring in a new piece of equipment? What will do to our labor numbers? But also, how long will it take for this piece of equipment to like pay off? And so we're a profitable business, like we're growing through our own revenues. I'm not in a position to be able to like move into a much bigger facility that has everything automated, right? Like we built out our own production facility, but then the stuff that we bring in is really like on a piece by piece basis. And so every time that we look at bringing in another piece of equipment, we say, well, how much time is this going to save us? And how much are we spending in our labor costs on that process? And how long will it take for this piece of equipment to pay off? Like even if you are weighing that against the potential growth that you can have by, being able to produce more, like you always need to look at that equation, because if the piece of equipment is going to pay for itself in 8 years, well, that piece of equipment might be really obsolete in 8 years, and it's not going to make sense for us to make that investment.
Right. Yeah. Kind of the same question, because I know when any business scales and you've been running it since the beginning, it's hard to kind of give stuff up. Do you have an outside financial firm that you use? You doing it all yourself when you're figuring out this equation, or what's the deal there?
I have a couple people. We work with like an accounting firm that does all of our bookkeeping and kind of, does our taxes and, gives us financial advice. And then I also have a group of advisors. Like we have an investment from a small fund that kind of helps me talk through these decisions and make these decisions. But a lot of the analysis, we're a small company. Like I'm the one who's sitting down,
Right.
and looking at
that. Okay. Yeah, that's really interesting. Let's talk kind of the third main thing that's been a challenge in scaling is I always know running a business, the things that don't drive the business forward, driving sales and things, these compliance things are like a have to do rather than a want to do sort of thing. So it's always really interesting on how to handle that. So if you could talk a little bit about your compliance requirements and how you've tackled those would be fantastic.
So I know we're going to talk about this later in the webinar, but we got SQF certified in 2022, and it was probably one of the hardest things that we've done as a company. It took a tremendous amount of labor and paying consultants and like aligning the team around like the SQF principles, which also means that we're, complying with FDA regulations. I think that this is something that is not the most fun thing to do, right? Like, I don't think anybody starts a bakery to say, oh, awesome, I'm going to be able to comply with the FDA. That's why I started this bakery. But as you are in business longer, like you realize that all of the FDA regulations that are there for a reason. It's to make safe food. And it can also be like a really powerful lens through which to view your manufacturing, to see, do your manufacturing processes make sense? Are they safe? I think a lot of SQF principles around, like making safe food have also allowed us to look at processes to make food more efficiently. So it's actually been really good for us as an organization to get these, to get the certification in place. But it's a ton of work, it's a ton of work, and it's food safety regulations. It's not a common sense thing. It's not like getting your food handler's license. Like there's a science behind it and a point of view that you as a layperson are not going to have.
Right. Yeah. So as you mentioned, we're going to get to that in a little bit more depth here in a second. So let's hop over to technology. So, you really can't run any business these days efficiently and scale it without some level of technology. So if you could talk a little bit about the technology that you've brought in and why you did it and kind of what the benefit of it is. And maybe in this case, if you had any, epic fails on things that you tried that didn't work. I don't know if you did or not, but if you did, that's always great information to pass along as well.
Yeah, well, first thing, we can talk about inventory and recipe costing software. Obviously, Wherefour has this capabilities, to really like look at costs on a batch by batch basis based on your current ingredient costs. So I think that's very, very powerful that you're able to like look at all of those inputs, and track, are things becoming more expensive or less more expensive or less expensive. Last year, all I did in our recipe costing and, ingredient costing software was just look at the price of butter. I would look at it one week and then I'd look at it the next week and then look at it the next week and say, oh my God, what are we going to do about this? So I think that's being able to holistically look at your cost and your recipe costs like that is like very, very powerful. Okay. So we've already been talking about automation. My bakery is not, we're not very automated. We still do a lot of processes by hand, but we're always trying to figure out like, well, how do we automate more of the process? So the big piece of automation equipment that we have is our depositor, which I was telling you about, which we actually got a long time ago. Another piece of automated equipment we got is a flow wrapper, which packages all of our individually packaged cookies. It like builds the bag around the product as opposed to us putting the product in bags, which we did for many, 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 many years. Other pieces of automation that we're looking at getting is, a conveyor that speaks to our depositors so that we're actually depositing cookie dough pucks like onto a tray that can go straight into an oven as opposed to hand placing them on that tray. I've seen operations where you have, a conveyor belt that will take your dough, up into your depositor and dump it in there. So, you're just eliminating more and more steps between like mixing, depositing, baking. So that's definitely something we've invested in and have more investments to make.
And that's what you were talking about a little bit earlier when you have the equation of basically what's the payback period on reducing labor in the operation.
For sure. And I will say that the two pieces of automated equipment, which I talked about, those are the ones that were no brainers. We were like, of course, this flow wrapper is going to pay for itself in 2 years because we spend so much time putting cookies in bags. This is insane. Like we have to get this piece of equipment. What's been challenging for us is now that we have these big pieces taken care of, we're like, well, the thing that the multi-head depositor that puts the cookies onto trays so we can put them directly in the oven, that has a longer timeline to pay it off. And so we're like, is that really an investment we want to make? You know, there might be something else that we want to invest in that makes more sense for the business. So it's
Yeah.
always a balancing act between your priorities.
Sure. And just really quickly, one of our questions kind of fits in here pretty nicely. Someone asked if you explored rental of assets rather than purchasing them outright.
There
if that
are
was ever considered.
some things that we do rent. So we rent, I mean, besides vehicles, obviously,
Yeah.
you know, we rent like a dishwasher, so that we can upgrade it and get it serviced. That's definitely something that we looked at. You know, we have a lease to own option on our metal detector. That's another piece of equipment we had to bring in for SQF. You know, in general, though, we haven't leased a ton of equipment. We haven't done a ton of work looking into those options, but I do know that that's out there.
And then, yeah, the last piece that we wanted to talk about was the EDI, invoice management.
Yes, so this is might be unique to me again because I am working with these 300 stores in, you know, in the mid-Atlantic area, but this is actually something we're implementing now, is to have a direct relationship between our invoicing software and the client, so that, you know, when we get orders from Whole Foods Market or Mom's Organic Market, which is a little, you know, lovely little organic chain in our area, those all directly go into our invoicing system. Right now, we spend hours and hours a week like making invoices in our invoicing system, and it has to stop. So, so that's a piece of automation that we're very excited about that we're working on now.
And it's nice to automate boring jobs like that. If you're doing the same thing over and over and over and over and over, that's
And
a good
I've
thing.
done it. I've done hours and hours of making
Yeah.
invoices, and I don't want to do it
No.
anymore.
So, okay, well, let's hop here. I know we talked a little bit about the SQF certification, but if there's anything you didn't mention before, I mean, I think the top thing there is super important on kind of what drove you to it. But if there's anything else that you didn't talk about before, let's hit on that now.
I mean, like getting SQF or any other GFSI certification is just becoming a standard requirement of larger retailers. I think in the past you were able to get away with like a GMP or a lower level certification, and that's not the case now. So if you want to sell to really anyone that's not a little mom and pop store, this is something that you're going to have to eventually get. So you might as well just get on board and get it now. You know, in terms of the process of getting certified, I think what's most helpful is to talk to someone who has been through it, because you don't know what it's like until you actually go through the process. For us, we hired a consultant who I found through my network. They wrote a plan, you know, for us that was all the policies that we needed to have to comply with the SQF code. And then once a week, we would sit down, read that section of the code, and then we would say, okay, what are all the things that we need to change in our operation to meet, you know, the policies as stated in this plan? And so that was sort of the first part of the implementation process. And then it took us about a year to actually get all of the different paperwork and policies and meetings and reviews like up and running. So it took a long time. One thing I will say that we did not do, which I would recommend that you do, is you can have SQF come out and do like, or whoever your certifying body is, have them come out and do like a gap assessment of your operation. And you're not working with a consultant, you're working with an actual auditor who will tell you this is all the stuff you need to do to get up to snuff. We didn't do that, and I really wish we would have, because I think we would have had a much better score in our initial audit. So, you know, learn from my mistakes, do the gap assessment.
That's great information to take a look at there. So did you have to get audited again, or it was you get a high enough score and then the next time you try to get a little bit higher?
No, we did have to have a surveillance audit, which was ultimately good, because essentially it really forced us to step up our implementation. But we gave ourselves, I think, like 90 days of implementation, like before we had our initial audit. And we really it should have been a year. Like we should have been implementing it before a year, because
Yeah.
by the time we had our you know, recertification audit and had been doing everything for a year, we got a great score, you know. So you got to give yourself that time.
Kind of last question here, just money always matters. If you had to kind of ballpark the cost of getting that done for an organization, what would you say, kind of between the consultants and time and all of that stuff, if you had to kind of wrap all that in?
I mean, just getting the plan was $25,000. We had to get a metal detector. We had to get a lot of swabs, ATP swab reader. You know, we had to do a lot of testing. I would say our initial investment was between like $50,000 and $60,000, and that doesn't include the time. My next hire, if we are able to, would be to get an SQF practitioner who can run the program for me. Right now, all of us on the management team take a piece of SQF. And so we all own little pieces of the program, which is great. But, then you're also, if you're able to bring on a full-time food safety person, like that's a whole other salary, which again, if you can afford it, I would definitely recommend.
Yeah. That's a lot of pies, $50,000.
A lot. It's a lot of pies for sure.
Awesome. So I know we're pretty much at the end of our time here. So I don't see any more open questions in here, but wanted to again thank Jenna, everybody that attended today. Again, this was our most popular webinar to date, so I'm glad we were able to connect with this many people. We are going to send a follow-up email, and in there we'll have our LinkedIn connections and emails if you wanted to contact either of us directly. But again, Jenna, thank you so much for joining us today. Again, taking time out of your valuable day. Congratulations on all your success. And I really hope the folks that attended today got a lot out of it. So thanks again.
Yeah, thank you so much. Thanks for having me.
All right.